Okay, the next trade that we're going to talk about, the next pattern, is the Tony trade. The Tony trade is a trend continuation pattern, and as I said to you before, there is nothing written about patterns on an indicator, so I had to name these patterns myself. This was the last pattern that I released of all the patterns, and I named this after Tony UK, who is actually the backbone of Woodie CCI Club. Does so many things in the background to help the Woodie CCI Club and to help other traders. So let's go through the Tony trade. Now the Tony trade is formed after we have had a trend. We must have a trend in place. And then what we do is we go above or below the zero line for a number of bars, but none of those bars can reach the plus or minus 100, showing a lack of momentum. And what we look for as a trigger is to have the Tony trade come back through the zero line with a possible trend line like break if we can draw one, and the trigger is coming back through the trend line and resume the prior trend. So let's take a look at a little bit more about that. The psychology I just mentioned, it's a lack of momentum, showing very weak to the bias, different bias of what the original trend was, and then we continue along with the trend that was there prior. So this is some trade examples, some setups of the Tony trade. Here we have a 30-minute chart. This happens to be a Phelps Dodge before it was taken over by Freeport McMoran. But this is a 30-minute chart of a stock. And what we had was we had a good, strong uptrend because we got up even into extremes and come back out of extremes. And then we went down below the zero line. And what we look for in a Tony trade is to go below that zero line or above for a minimum of 4 bars and a maximum 9. Now that doesn't mean that 10 wouldn't be good or 3 wouldn't be good. It's just that the higher probability is when we have at least 4 and a max of 9. That gives us the high probabilities, and as traded, that's what we want, that high probability. So we got a trend to the upside here. We can draw a trend line break on the CCI. And you notice we had 5 bars below the zero line, 5 bars below the zero line. Not one of them got to the minus 100, and come back up through the zero line. Now, the key is look at that break through the zero line. Very good angle. What we did there was we broke some kind of support or resistance, in this case resistance, and started again to the prior trend. Our trigger was crossing the zero line. Now some aggressive traders take it immediately as soon as it crosses the zero line. Some other traders that are more moderate will wait to 20 to 30 seconds, and then the more conservative traders wait to bar close. So we enter on the trade here and go right back to the prior trend, which was a nice up move, and collect this whole up move on a 30-minute chart. So again, a nice trade. Just the trend continuation Tony trade. Now this is on the Russell, and we had the same scenario. We had a good trend in place to the upside, as you can see on the CCI. We had a draw a trend line. We had more than 4 bars, but less than 9 bars. And we crossed back through the zero line on a good angle up. See that good angle there? Crossing the zero line, that put us in this trade somewhere in this range here to get the rest of that up move to resume the original up move trend. So again, 4 to 9 bars, max 9, minimum 4. None of the bars have to get to the minus 100, in this case for longs, and we just follow that up. And this is on the Russell 2000 5-minute chart. Okay, here's a Tony trade long. We had a trend up, and it was strong because we did get to extremes, pull back, And actually what we formed here was somewhat of an inverted little ghost. You see that little inverted ghost there? And breaking that and coming through the zero line on a good angle was the entry into the Tony trade. So we got entered into this trade right in this area here and followed that trend all the way up with the Tony trade. So sometimes on these Tony trades, none of these bars could get to the minus 100 and or up to the plus 100 for a down move. And sometimes we'll get some kind of a pattern there. And if you get some kind of a pattern, that just adds credibility to the pattern. And when you get that good line, good angle breaking through the zero line, that's what you look for as a trader. Again, this was on the Mini Russell 2000 5-minute chart, and picked out a very nice trade for you. Now I'm going to replay some examples of the Tony trade, and we'll take a look at that. Now remember, we must have had a prior trend, which we did. We had a prior trend to the downside. We went above the zero line. We had more than 4 bars, max of 9 inside of 9 bars, and we come back down through the zero line. Not one of the bars showed any kind of movement above the plus 100 in this case. There's also a couple clues here. You have somewhat of a ghost pattern, even though it might be not a ghost that we would take because this is a flat shoulder here. It still is somewhat of a ghost pattern with this Tony trade. The other clue is if you look at the sidewinder, it says we had a nice trend with the green, one above the zero line, and all of a sudden we got kind of a flat and flat trend develop, which shows lack of momentum to the upside or a lack of buying, and coming back through the zero line was our trigger to go long. So to go short, excuse me. So let's take a look at that trade as it develops. There's our trigger coming down through the zero line. Boom, nice angle down through the zero line, continues the nice momentum to the downside, goes right down to extremes, hooks from extremes, continues down, no reason to get out of the trade yet. This is on the DAX 5-minute chart. And there's the beginning of it again. Let's click it on and follow that down again. Again, notice the angle breaking the zero line. And once the trade takes off, look at the angles of it taking off. Right down to extremes. Hooks from extremes and continues down. Now, one point I want to point out here, and you could stay with this trade until it crosses back through the minus 100. But people, if you notice, we went down and we hooked from the extreme, which meant we were in an oversold condition. But even though prices went down and we made new lows here, the CCI comes up. And as I explained earlier, the CCI is measuring acceleration. Prices were accelerating quite fast to get us down here, and even though they were making new lows, they weren't making the new lows quite as fast. And so that's why the CCI hooked, and that's why the CCI is considered a leading indicator because of that. And prices went down even a little bit more, but not as fast as in the beginning. So that is a trade of a Tony trade on the German DAX on a 5-minute. Let's look at another Tony trade. This is on the YM, a 5-minute. Again, we had a nice uptrend. You see we had nice uptrend going. We come down below the minus 100, below the zero line towards the minus 100, but not one bar could get below that minus 100. We have a minimum of 4 bars below with the 5th bar breaking. Now, if we draw a trend line, it almost would be perpendicular with the CCI. So again, crossing the 0 line is a trigger on the Tony trade. Let's take a look at this trade as it develops. Notice the angle coming through. Look at that angle of it continuing. And that's because it's continuing the prior trend, and that's what you should expect on a Tony trade. Crossing back through to 100 is an exit. So again, 4 bars minimum, 9 max. None of them go below the minus 100. Look for the draw trend line if you can. Crossing the 0 line is the entry into the pattern. And what you should expect, and I say with the Tony trade, because you're going back with the trend from a weak move to the downside, that you should be able to at least get a good movement to the upside here. Okay, we draw a downtrend line, and this is on Apple. This is a 15-minute Apple trade. Again, we got 5 bars below the 0 line, the 6th bar here coming back through it again. We have a nice trend line break, and let's see how this pattern develops. Now, another nice thing, that a clue, even with 6 bars or 5 bars below the 0 line, none got to the 100, but also look, we never even changed colors on the chop zone indicator, and we never changed colors on the sidewinder. And that gave us a clue that not only could we get to the minus 100, but we didn't even change the colors on the chop zone or the sidewinder. It stayed with the uptrend. So we come back, nice angle coming back through the 0 line here. Let's watch this trade develop. Again, nice angled up. We got up to extremes, hook from extremes. No reason to get out of the trade until we cross the plus 100. So again, trend line break, straight up. Some people will stay with it, and look, it even went up even higher, didn't it? Some people will stay with this trade. Look at that. So again, it depends on what exit you like to use, whether you got out here or you like to stay with it maybe until you go to a second down or whatever, or you just like to stay with trades. But that's a beautiful trade. Let me go back to the beginning on it again. We go long at 132.44. This is on Apple, a stock, 15-minute chart, beautiful angle. Angles are important when you trade the CCI, very important. So a nice trade. If you got out at 134 and change, you got in at I believe it was 132. I forgot. I'll go back to it and we'll get it. We got the 134. If you stayed with it, you're up here to 138 almost. And we got in that trade. Let me get it back here. At 132 and change. So a very, very nice trade on a 15-minute chart. Again, same patterns, just on a stock, different time frame. Again, look at the angles. The clue, solid blue on the chop zone indicator. Clue, solid green on the sidewinder. Clue, nice trend line break. Clue, 5 bars and none of them can get to the minus 100. Showing that once we go back with the trend, beautiful angles to the upside. So that's the Tony trade long on for Apple computer on a 15-minute chart. Okay, let's look at the German DAX on a 5-minute chart, Tony trade. We had a good trend to the downside. We did go above the 0 line for 5 bars, but we did not change the trend. So we're still looking for a trend trade, and a Tony trade comes up. We got 4 bars above the 0 line, and let's watch this one develop. Again, nice angle. Look at the angle breaking the 0 line. Look at the angle after the trigger. CCI traders getting in worldwide. Hook from extreme. No reason to get out of the trade. And finally get out of the trade at crossing the minus 100. Now on this DAX, let me get back to the beginning of the trade. What are some clues that this trade's going to work? You'll notice we did have an up move with 5 bars and we couldn't continue the trend, and now we only get an up trade with 4 bars. What does that tell you as a clue? Doesn't that tell you that, hey, there's not a lot of interest in buying, and now the second time they attempted to bring it up, it wasn't going to work? You'll also notice as it went up, we had colors on the chop zone, on the sidewinder, and now we got solid green going. So there's some clues there to tell you that this trade was definitely going to work. Let me get it back to the beginning again. And we're in the trade at 80.18 short. At 80.18 short. And let's see how this trade goes. 80.18 short. There's 79.73. 79.55. Out at 79.55 was the low, out at 93. So we were in this at 80.18. It got down to 78.55. That's 45 points, 55 points, 63 points max. Maybe we could get 60 out of it or 55 out of it at $35 a point, $35 approximately. That's probably close to a $2,000 trade on one simple pattern. So again, just a very, very nice trade. The Tony trade, 5-minute trend continuation pattern.